Hello, everyone. Thank you for visiting our courseware site and welcome to your first video presentation for Introduction to Film. So, at this point, what we're going to do is we'll have a recap of what we just talked about. I remember we talked about the mise en scène and the beauty of analyzing and understanding the mise en scène in films. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to make some sense out of one of the greatest films of all time. Actually, itong pelikula na to ay isa sa mga, hindi lang isa. Actually, it remained in rank one of the greatest films of all time for many decades. And later on, you'll learn more about this because yung ginawa ng director na to noong 19 kopong-kopong ay sinundan na ng mga ibang director after after niya ginawa ito. So it was more of like a breakthrough film for him. And eventually it became a breakthrough film for the history of film. And it would be a crying shame if you as a com major who took up introduction to film not to know this film or even see this film. So I'll be gladly to walk you through. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a quick mise en scène analysis, and we will be looking at the surrounding elements in a scene that gives meaning. Okay, so what could be our objectives? So we'll get to know the film that is entitled Citizen Kane, which was produced in 1941. We'll watch it frame by frame and try to get more meaning into it. May pinapakita bang character, may pinapakita bang behavior, meron bang mga underlying themes inside the scene or underneath the scene? Is there meaning in the dark? Is there meaning in the lights? Um, is there meaning in the balance between the left and the right? Sino yung nasa kaliwa? Sino yung nasa kanan? Titingnan natin yan later on. And then later on, and then after that, we'll try to meet again and try to write a mise en scène analysis of a scene in Les Diaboliques, 1955. So before we begin, let's get to know who is this very great artist who made Citizen Kane. His name is Orson Welles. And this is him when he was, nung matanda na siya. And it was a crying shame because when Orson Welles started doing films, medyo hindi siya pinapansin. Para siyang si Brillante Mendoza, yung mga great directors natin sa Pilipinas. Parang he would come up with films and then people would just, would just pass by it, not realizing how beautiful his films would be pagdating ng araw. And there would be many revisits. And as a matter of fact, the film that we're about to see in this video, actually, we'll just be analyzing a scene, is one of one great requirement for anyone who is um, studying film. So Orson Welles was born in on May 6, 1915. And actually, hindi siya nagsimula sa pelikula. Siya ay nagsimula sa radio as a radio artist and as a radio director. So yung mga drama sa radyo, dyan siya magaling nung araw. He was known for his if you would know if you would remember excuse me, if you would remember the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, yung parang yung mga Martians nagpunta sa mundo tapos ng um, sinakop yung mundo, there was an alien invasion. Originally, it was an Orson Welles concept, and it was originally a radio program. It was a radio drama, but it was so believable that people who were listening to the radio at that time went out of the house out of panic. Ganun siyang ka-effective, ganun siyang kagaling. And eventually, he moved on to making films, and he was known for his breakthrough film, Citizen Kane. And, Eventually, as what I've said, when Citizen Kane was shown in 1951, many people were like shocked. Parang, paano nangyari yun? Anong storya no? Hindi naman maganda. I mean, it was just okay. It wasn't a bad film, but it's not great either. It's just that throughout the years, critics eventually realized the beauty and the the genius of Orson Welles, and that's what makes it beautiful. And they started revisiting Citizen Kane, and other Hollywood directors or other foreign directors would would give tribute to Orson Welles. If you would notice alam niyo ba yung opening ng Harry Potter, yung mula sa labas, papasok sa bintana na may glass, tapos yung camera magpapass through dun sa glass. Actually, nagsimula siya dito sa 1951 film na Citizen Kane. Okay? Eventually, he was awarded with the American Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award. Okay. So, what is Citizen Kane? Citizen Kane is a 1941 American mystery drama by Orson Welles, who is who was the producer, the co-author, director, and the star. So, sino ba yung nasa picture na yan? Yung nakikita niyo dyan na nasa podium? It was Orson Welles. So, siya rin yung director, siya rin yung nagsulat, siya pa yung bida. Okay? And it was a typically a low budgeted film at that time. It was an indie film at that time, and it was generally, as what I've said, snubbed by critics and by audiences during its time. And it's the story about a newspaper magnate, a newspaper, an owner of a newspaper. The story is about um, a newspaper tycoon who owns um, like, say for example, the Philippine Star, parang ganyan. And his name is Charles Foster Kane. All right? And when a reporter is assigned to decipher newspaper magnate Kane's dying words, his investigation gradually reveals the fascinating portrait of a complex man who rose from obscurity to staggering heights. So, this is a story of rags to riches. Isang batang dating mahirap, tapos eventually yumaman, nagmay-ari ng isang dyaryo. During that time, a dyaryo would be comparable to like owning ABS-CBN now, or Globe, or its communications. It was alright? Uh, though Kane's friends and colleagues, Jedediah Leland and his mistress, Susan Alexander, he fragmented of light on Kane's life. The reporter fears he may never penetrate the mystery of the elusive man's final word, which was Rosebud. So it's more of like a biographical story. So susundan mo lang yung buhay ni Kane, right? From being a poor fellow from the country to being the richest man in the United States during its time. This was not this but don't think that this was based on a true story. This is highly fictional. Pero alam ko meron tinitira ito na isang isang public figure during its time. So, if you would notice, itong pag-angat niya from rags to riches would come with consequences, and one of which would be having a wife and a number two. So meron siyang mistress. And at that time, Cain would eventually, because he was so powerful, he eventually decided to try politics. So parang siya si Duterte, yung ganyan. Na parang mayaman, sikat na ako, kilala na ako, may mga foundations na ako, and I'm going to be very great. So, at this point, I'd like to try public office. And one time in his life, he tried to become a politician. But during the campaign period, but during the campaign period, he was blackmailed by this crooked, you know, by this crooked, what do you call this, reporter na, sige, pag tumakbo ka, isusulat ko na meron kang kabit, sisiraan kita sa buong Amerika. All right, during that time, it was very controversial. People were very conservative during that time, and having having an affair with another woman if you're married and have kids could be disastrous to one's career. So what we're going to do now is that I'll let you watch the scene first. Just enjoy the scene. Just sit back, relax, enjoy the scene, and then later on we'll analyze each movement, each frame, one by one. Are you ready? Okay.
I'm sending Junior home in the car, Charles, with Oliver.
Night, Father!
Bye, son. Emily.
So as you can see, he's very, very
Why'd you send Junior home in the car, Emily? What are you doing in the taxi?
There's
important
a
and
call
very
I want you to make with
famous.
me, Charles.
Can wait.
No, I
Then
can't.
again, the wife received a
What's this all
letter
about,
na
Emily?
pinapunta siya sa isang
May not be about
bahay.
anything at all. I intend to find out.
Where are you going?
Pupunta ako doon,
I'm
sabi
going
ng
to
wife.
185 West 74th Street.
Are you coming with me?
If you wish, you may come with me.
There you go.
I'll come with you.
And 185 Street
No idea you had this flair for melodrama, Emily.
is the house of the mistress.
Come right in, Mr. Kane.
See? Kilala siya nung katulong.
Charlie. Charlie forced me to send your wife the letter. I didn't want it. He's been saying the most terrible.
So please meet Susan, the mistress, and then Geddes, the crooked
Mrs. Kane,
journalist.
I don't suppose anybody would introduce us. I'm Jim Geddes.
Yes.
I made Miss Alexander send you the note, Mrs. Kane. She didn't want to at first, but she did it.
Charlie, the things he said to me, he threatened.
Geddes! I don't think I will postpone doing something about you until I'm elected. To start with, I think I'll break your neck. Maybe you can do it, maybe you can't, Mr. Kane.
Charles, your breaking this man's neck would scarcely explain this note. Serious consequences for Mr. Kane, for yourself, and for your son.
He just wanted to get her to
What
come
does
here
this
and
note mean, Miss?
I'm Susan Alexander. I know what you think, Mrs. Kane.
What does this note mean, Miss Alexander?
She don't know, Mrs. Kane. She just sent it because I made her see it wouldn't be smart for her not to send it. In case you don't know, Emily, this gentleman... I'm not a gentleman. Your husband's only trying to be funny, calling me one. I don't even know what a gentleman is. You see, my idea of a gentleman... But, Mrs. Kane, if I owned a newspaper and I didn't like the way somebody was doing things, some politicians say, I'd fight him with everything I had. Only I wouldn't show him in a convict suit with stripes so his children could see the picture in the paper or his mother. You're a cheap, crooked grafter. We're talking now about what you are. Mrs. Kane, I'm fighting for my life, not just my political life, my life.
Charlie said no, she was...
That's what I said. Here's the chance I'm willing to give him. More of a chance than he'd give me. Unless Mr. Kane makes up his mind by tomorrow that he's so sick he has to go away for a year or two. Monday morning, every paper in the state except his will carry the story I'm going to give him.
What story?
Story about him and Miss Alexander, Mrs. Kane.
There isn't any story.
Shut up!
Mr. Kane...
You got evidence that'll look bad in the headlines. Do you want me to give you the evidence, Mr. Kane? Rather, Mr. Kane withdrew without having to get the story published. Not that I care about him, but I'd be better off.
What about...
So would you, Mrs. Kane.
What about me? Charlie said my name would be dragged through the mud. But everywhere I went from
There
now
seems
on...
to be only one decision you can make, Charles. I'd say it had been made for you.
Can't tell me the voters of this state.
I'm not interested in the voters of this state right now. I'm interested in our son.
Charlie, if they publish the story, it'll be
They
over.
won't. Good night, Mr. Geddes. Are you coming, Charles?
No. I'm staying here. I can fight this all alone.
Charles, if you don't listen to reason, it may be too late.
Too late? For what? For you and this public thief to take the love of the people of this state away from me?
Charlie, you got other things to think about. Your little boy. You don't want him to read about you in the papers.
There's only one person in the world to decide what I'm going to do, and that's me.
You decided what you were going to do, Charles, some time ago.
You're making a bigger fool of yourself than I thought you would, Mr. King. I've got nothing to talk to you about. You're licked. Why don't you... Get out. If you want to see me, have the warden write me a letter. If anybody else I'd say what's going to happen to you, it'd be a lesson to you. Only you're going to need more than one lesson. You're going to get more than one lesson. Don't worry about me, Geddes. Don't worry about me! I'm Charles Foster Kane! I'm no cheap, crooked politician trying to save himself from the consequences of his crimes! Geddes! I'm going to send you to Sing Sing! Sing Sing, Geddes! Sing Sing! Have you a car, Mrs. Kane?
Yes, thank you.
Right.
Good night.
All right. So as you can see, this scene in Citizen Kane is, let me go back to that, begins at the 653rd minute of the film, where Kane, a wealthy newspaper publisher, and his wife Emily have gone to the residence of Kane's mistress, Susan, where they are met by Susan and a crooked politician, Geddes. During the scene, Getty tries to pressure Kane into withdrawing from the governor's race against him or face public exposure of Kane's affair with Susan. Right. Now, at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to listen. Well, you'll just be going to be listening to me because this slide now is a muted slide and we'll be analyzing it frame by frame. So when you say frame by frame, ito yung kada movement, kada segundo. Right? Titingnan natin kung ano yung binibigay na ibig sabihin ng bawat movements at bawat framing doon sa pag-frame. Siguro earlier, when you were watching, you were just enjoying and just, analyze, interpreting or getting to know the narrative, whatever is happening, and then eventually we reach the climax. But if you really look deeper, into the the basic parts, the smallest parts of the scene, you will get actually more meaning into it. At actually, malalaman nyo na kung ano yung mga desisyon na pumapasok sa isip ng mga tao in that scene. Okay, wait lang. There you go. Excuse me. Let's start. So, as you can see, this is the part wherein we get to see the wife being able to know na that her husband is having an affair. Okay, and this is the beginning of the shot where Kane is near the left of the frame facing Emily, who is on the right side of the frame. All right, mahalaga yung kanan, the right side. Susan joins Kane on the left, and the three characters are positioned as they are in the frame in this figure. But Kane turns away from the two women and starts to walk towards the background as he goes to Getty. Alright? So mahalaga yung paglakad niya mula doon sa dilim. If you notice that there's light sa malapit sa camera but there is dark further down. But Getty walks forward while staying on the right side of the frame. So nandun siya sa kanan. Kane remains in the background, in the center of the frame, between Emily on the left and Getty's on the right. For the rest of the shot, Gettys, and Emily remain in the foreground and on the opposite side of the frames. But Susan rushes into the frame from the left and joins Kane in the background center. So they're both in the dark. Yung dalawang nasa likod, while those are in the foreground are in the light. Okay? But Susan, you will notice Susan, the mistress, will walk forward towards the frame from re- leaving Kane at the background. After that, Susan takes another step forward. There you go, leaving Kane in the background more. Towards the end of the shot, Emily, Susan, and Gettys, all in the foreground, turn their heads and look towards Kane, who remains in the background. Right. Hintayin natin yan. Lahat sila titingin kay Kane. There you go. So that's really very important. So lahat ng mga characters nakalingon, lahat ng mga characters nakalingon nakalingon kay Kane, nakatalikod sa camera. Why? Because the center of the frame now is Kane. But if you would notice, uh, the center the center of the frame, which is Kane right now, is still in the dark, while those who are looking at him are in the light. So what is it saying? You see, there's also the concept about the right side of the frame, which is really very important because dito natin malalaman kung sino yung may power, sino yung in command, who is in control. Let me just try to rewind this a bit, okay? I'll just forward this a bit. Pagpasok nung asawa sa scene, doon sa mismong bahay nung mistress, okay? There. So let me just freeze it here. If you would notice, the wife is on the right side of the frame. At this point, siya yung nagko-confront sa asawa niya, Hoy, may babae ka pala. Tinamaan ka ng magaling. You get what I mean? And then the husband, on the other hand, is not saying anything. He's just absorbing everything that is happening. This is kind of a shock for him. He thought he was always in control. He's the powerful, the always in command, always always have always have the always has the last say. We see, but at this point we see the wife being on the right side of the frame, establishing that she is in control. Why is this? It's because usually in um, in filmmaking, especially when you're creating mise en scène, if you want to focus on something, sometimes you put it in the center. But if you want to gawin mo siyang, gawin mo siya, but if you want to establish it more, it would be more effective if you put that person or that character in the foreground. It means mas malapit sa camera, and put it at the right side of the frame because it has something to do with the brain chemistry. The yung visuals daw natin, yung pagtingin natin sa isang pelikula or sa isang picture, yung nasa right side daw, yun yung pinaka-komportable tayong tingnan. You understand? At kung sino yung nasa right side, yun yung pinakikinggan natin. This will also happen as we move along. But, let's look at this. Let's just continue. Dito, dito makikita natin na nagsama yung tatlo, yung love triangle, the husband, the wife, and the mistress. Pero, kanino malapit si Kane? Malapit pa siya sa asawa niya o doon sa number 2 niya? We notice here that Kane is relatively closer to the mistress than to the wife. What is this saying? This is saying a lot of things. This is saying that, even if hindi pa niya sinasabi kung ano desisyon niya, if you know how to analyze a mise en scène, you would eventually realize that this is a foreshadowing of what his decisions will be. That, sige, go, muwi ka na, hindi ako sasama sa'yo, dito ako sa babae ko. Alright? But then again, at this point, you would notice that Kane moves to the background, and this is the foreground now, to the left, Pero sino yung inilagay doon sa right? The right, the right frame now is being occupied by Gettys, the crooked politician, and he will eventually walk further down, making him a foreground and thus making Kane the dark background. So he's alone. Mag-isa siya. You understand? Eventually, the mistress will enter the frame. They're both in the dark as the conversations continue. Iiwan pa rin nung mistress si Kane, leaving him in the background again, alone in the dark, and then it will continue on. At this point, this is a very nice frame to establish what? To establish levels. As you can see, see Emily, the wife, is very near to the camera. The second one who is near to the camera is Getty's. The next one who is, relatively near to the camera and also part of the foreground is Susan, who is the mistress. Um, but eventually, alam natin that there is depth in here dahil malayo itong si Kane mula doon sa camera at doon sa mga characters in the scene. Eventually, all these people will move their heads towards Kane. Okay, there you go. That's a very powerful scene because this is saying so much. It's more of like, okay, after all has been said and done, what do we do? What happens now? What do you say? All right? And then there he was in the dark. Okay. But if we continue on, you would see that the camera cuts to King's back. Siya na ngayon yung nasa right right side of the frame. You see? And everybody's just like the background. He's in the dark, but he will not be in the dark much longer because later on he will say what he has to say. Okay? So that's it. Now let's try to make some sense into this. So how would we analyze this? Um, what meaning or what interpretations can we get out of what we just talked about? I mean, I think we have established, or it has taken too much time just to analyze it frame by frame. But let's go through them one by one. You notice that there was shifting of alignments during the confrontation. Nilalakad dito, mag-move yung camera from here, from one point to another. And there were also measured movements. Hindi masyadong magalaw. Lakad lang ng lakad. Tingin lang ng tingin. Mukha lang ang ginagamit. Alright? Measured movements in terms of lighting, of of camera alignments. Alright? And then there was the concept of the right side of the frame, which shows the position of power. Also, we see that being the concept of being in the background, which would entail me being on the losing side. 'Di ba? Ikaw yung nandun sa dulo, ikaw yung talunan. Diyan ka sa dilim, doon ka sa likod. And then finally, what we call the concept of the right side again, which means the right side of the frame, meaning the position of power. And I put this again because it is very rampant in this scene, and it's probably one thing that you might want to consider when you create your own films moving forward. So, what is this scene saying? All right, that Kane as a character is someone who was emotionally strained in this scene. He was helpless, he was powerless, he was alone and lonely. And much is going on in this lengthy shot, both in groupings of characters and in dramatic impact. For example, the shot begins with Kane between his wife and mistress, diba? Though closer to the mistress than to his wife, and with the blackmailer out of the frame, in fact, waiting in the dark part of the room. But the shot ends with Kane in the center of the frame, facing his wife, mistress, and blackmailer in the foreground. By his own choice, he is physically and emotionally alone. That's what it's saying. In spite of his wife's practical advice to go home, let's let's tigilan mo na tong kalokohan na ito, and his mistress's emotional appeals, he's determined that only he will make the decision he is about to announce. You see, so that's a very good example of a mise en scène analysis, but it's it's uh, it's kind of critical though. But it's more of like, I want you to experience this because moving forward, when you watch scenes, it's essential that you get to understand what's really happening between the frames. All right? Kumbaga sa isang nobela or sa isang tulaw, you read between the lines. In a film, you read between the frames. Okay, so I think that's it. I think we have achieved our objectives. We got to know what Citizen K 1941 is, and we were able to watch a frame by frame analysis of a scene in Citizen Kane. So, thank you so much for watching this video and for listening. I hope you were able to take down notes because there will be a quiz after this. I think there's a quiz under this module, and I wish you all good luck. Have a good day. Continue watching films.